Hello there, it's Emma Nelson broadcasting to you live from Midori House in London. This is Monocle on Saturday. Welcome. Coming up on today's programme, we'll be going through the week's news and culture with Alex von Tunzelmann, historian, author and screenwriter. Good morning, Alex. What have you spotted?
Good morning. Well, most of the news is all of the kind of things that are going on under Donald Trump's new presidency in the United States. It's happening so fast, it's almost impossible to keep up with.
They're flooding the zone. Thank you for that. We look forward to it. Monocle's Georgina Godwin, our traveller, is on her tour. She'll bring us an update on where she is and what she's up to. So that's all coming up on Monocle on Saturday with me, Emma Nelson. First, though, a look at the news. Three more hostages held by Hamas in Gaza are being released today. One Israeli, a French dual national and a US Israeli are expected to return home. 180 Palestinian prisoners will be released by Israel. The US is to impose tariffs of 25% on Canada and Mexico, along with 10% on China today. The White House says they will not give any details of whether there will be exemptions. Russian forces have launched a missile attack on the historic centre of the Ukrainian Black Sea port of Odessa, a UNESCO World Heritage Site. 2 people have been injured and buildings have been damaged, including the Hotel Bristol, a luxury landmark built at the end of the 19th century. And those are the headlines on Monocle Radio. So a very warm welcome, everybody. This is Monocle on Saturday, and in the studio with me, Alex von Tunzelmann, historian, author and screenwriter. A very good morning to you, Alex.
Good morning.
How goes it?
Oh, it's all going pretty well, I think. Yes.
Happy February.
Happy February, I know. It did feel like a very long January, didn't it? Everybody's been saying.
Well, yeah, I know that Nick Maniso, our design editor, talks about how January, the year doesn't begin until February, and I don't mind. Sometimes I just go into January with my ears back, flapping, and think, okay, because I sort of try to set the tone and the pace for January, and I go at it, and I get loads of stuff done, and then come February, I just literally fall apart because there is that. I think someone once described it, the idea of February being a non-entity of a month, insofar as if you're in the Northern Hemisphere, for example, ladies and gentlemen, if you're listening somewhere slightly sunnier than where we are, which frankly is everywhere, you have this persistence of grey. So you still have the sky being covered. You still have no shoots on the trees. You still have cold. It's still dark. And there's nothing giving you any sense that time is moving forward. Okay, you might get a couple of minutes extra in the morning, but February just sits there it just wears me down.
Yes, my mother always used to say, they say April is the cruelest month. She was always like, no, it's February.
It's February.
It's definitely February. Anyway, this is great news for everybody listening. You're stuck with, 28 days of it now. Here it comes.
Great. So we're going to have an awful lot of time listening to Monocle Radio because we're going to be inside. Actually, you might want to pop us in your ears when you're going for a run. So anyway, how was your week I don't know, you had a reasonable January or
Yes, fine. Yes, quite busy. We're finishing up a series I work on called History's Secret Heroes at the BBC for Radio 4. Have just been finishing scripts for the 3rd series of that, which is very exciting, which is about to be recorded by Helena Bonham Carter, and we'll be going out later this year.
Can you tell us what's in it, or is that one major BBC secret?
I think they'll probably get quite cross with me if I tell you what's in it, but certainly in previous series, these are true stories from World War II of people who've shown sort of extraordinary courage, but quite ordinary people often who've done this. And actually, it's sort of, it's a lovely show and it's very, interesting to do, and you get to sort of, find out about all these fascinating human stories from around the world and very different people, men, women, everything. And I sort of, it's been funny sort of doing it, well, funny perhaps or haunting perhaps doing it at the moment, because it sort of started out as, interesting enough show. But of course, we're now living in a world that is becoming increasingly right-wing authoritarian. Suddenly it feels sort of much more relevant, I suppose, in some way. But also, hopefully, at least an inspiring take on that, at least.
And the people you were featuring are the you and me's of the world.
Well, yes, exactly. They sort of often started out, just really quite ordinary, but then, of course, extraordinary times came along, so they responded to those. So certainly in previous series, we've had all sorts of fascinating characters, and I think some of them, one that really stayed with me, for instance, was a lady in the Philippines who suffered from leprosy, but became a spy, and a very effective one because, of course, the Japanese who were occupying the Philippines didn't want to search her. So she was able to slip through checkpoints very effectively, which just an extraordinary courage to her, an extraordinary thing to do. So they are quite amazing people.
I love the fact that she's found the one upside to having leprosy.
Yeah,
that sort of moment of sunlight in the grey skies. I think this week especially has really focused minds on what you've just mentioned in terms of the return of populism. That people in Germany were noticing that there were enormous numbers of ceremonies and events to mark the liberation of Auschwitz, Birkenau, the Holocaust Memorial Day, events taking place in Berlin to mark it, and then a few hours later, the Friedrich Merz, member of the Bundestag, it is on capitulates to the far right, gets them on board to try to push through a piece of legislation on migration. And you just get this moment that you have two, you almost want to sort of like knock on someone's head and go, do you just realise what we've been talking about here? And,
yes.
And you just wonder where people have got, where that little lapse has occurred in the grey cells, that the connection is just not being made.
It does feel a bit like that, doesn't it? And I think it felt quite important to memorialise the Holocaust this year. I mean, it's always important, but perhaps even more so. And I think that was notable. King Charles went out, I think, as part of it, and he said something about it's particularly important to do it this year. And, obviously the royals tend to stay away from making political comments, but I just wondered if in that there was a bit of a hint, actually, that this was time to remind everybody of what the consequences can be of going down this path. King
Charles has an amazing ability of being political without doing anything or saying anything. Just being somewhere is actually quite an amazing skill of his. And there's a story in the Times actually this morning here in London, where actually it has an exclusive. Well done, Times. King Charles to star in Amazon documentary.
Oh, my goodness.
It says the King is filming at Dumfries House. It's an incredibly beautiful place. For the feature-length film, focused on his charity work and environmentalism. Now, what's quite funny is about 4 decades ago, everyone was going, oh, there he is, just being silly. But the fact is that he sort of managed to turn up and go, actually, I was right.
Yes.
And so let's have a look. I'll just read out the Times for you. The King will star in a feature-length film for Amazon Prime. I love that use of language.
Yes, isn't it marvellous?
It sort of gives him, sort of elevates him akin to Harrison Ford in terms of his sort of dynamism. But to show, not tell viewers how to transform people, places and ultimately the planet. The documentary will focus on his philosophy that people, nature and the built environment are interlinked, with filmmakers looking at Charles's charity work in the UK and overseas. This is going to be a really tricky balance to strike, isn't it? Now, as a storyteller, how do you show, not tell, when your star is the King of England?
I think that's really quite challenging, and it'll be interesting to see what sort of media performer he is, actually, when that comes off. I suspect, though, it'll probably meet quite a sympathetic audience. I think what's been very interesting since, of course, the change in reigns, obviously the late Queen dying a couple of years ago and Charles taking over. And there was a lot of feeling that Charles was, people thought he was terribly unpopular, that people, that things would change, that Britain would sort of turn against the royal family. None of that's happened. What happened almost immediately is that Charles became incredibly popular. So there's something quite interesting happening that isn't just about personalities. It's about the monarchy itself, which clearly the British people actually really like. So I think the interesting thing is, even if he is, and he may well be, I don't know, maybe he'll be fabulous on TV, who can say, or he might be quite wooden. I don't think it'll matter that much, because I think people will want to like him and they will want to respond to him. And if he's a bit wooden, they'll just be like, oh, isn't that sweet? So would I be. There's a sort of, I think there's an affection in Britain, at least, towards the royal family that is sort of quite extraordinary and and clearly very changeable. That, as I say, literally, when he became king, his ratings went up overnight.
One thing that hasn't has been noticed in this article in the Times is that, I'm quoting again, it's a radical departure for the palace, which has previously preferred to work with domestic producers such as the BBC and ITV on big set-piece documentaries. I mean, when you see King Charles to star in an Amazon documentary, you think, oh, we've gone a bit Harry and Meghan here. And I know that, you work for the BBC and, the BBC is a wonderful place, so we're not going to say anything bad about the BBC. Or are we? Or do we? Do we just say, hang on a minute? Many questions are being asked about the way that broadcasting changes to meet a new audience. Yes. And that feeling, perhaps, that the BBC and ITV may not be able to have that relevance that something like Amazon does.
It's interesting, isn't it? It would be very interesting to know how this had come about, whether Amazon pitched it to him or whether the royals pitched it to them, if you see what I mean. Which way? Does it say anything about that in the article? I don't know. But
it does talk about it is unlikely to be welcome news to animals at Amazon's rival Netflix, which is a multi-million-dollar multi-year deal with the Duke and Duchess of Sussex. So it now becomes a battle between the online streamers, doesn't it? Amazon versus Netflix as opposed to BBC and ITV. So.
And which faction of the royals you go for, because, of course, it certainly appears that Harry and Meghan, the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, are still rather outside the tent in terms of the British royal family. I mean, I don't know whether they're fully estranged or not. Yes.
Really nice tent.
Outside the palace. But yes, they seem to be, living a very separate life in California and not, I don't obviously know the intricate details of how the family feels about each other, but obviously it's not super close at this point. So will they be in a ratings war as well?
And we're talking as well about the how the palace is handling this, because obviously the palace has to be very, very, very careful. Lots of stuff emerging about Prince Andrew this week. But just going back to this article, it says, a palace source says the film is not about the king. It's about the work that he has inspired around the world and exploring and finding ways for community to work in closer connection with nature and towards a more sustainable future. That's a mouthful of a press release. The film is not about the king. I think it might be.
But who would be watching it if it didn't have the king in it?
Exactly.
I mean, let's be honest, that is the big box office draw, isn't it? I think, to be realistic, I think we all know that is what's going to make people watch it. And I mean, good for him in a sense, because actually if he can get publicity to these sorts of issues, and I think he has been, it's been a very sensible choice for him, as well as I think something he cares about deeply, to adopt environmentalism, because it's not actually particularly a partisan political issue. You can, of course, have plenty of Green Tories out there, for instance, who care about the land and this sort of thing, so it doesn't sort of necessarily divide on party politics. So it kind of keeps him away from that. But it is something that he can sincerely get involved in and care about, and perhaps channel those political urges that you rather implied he has.
We will look forward to watching it. Alex, what else have you spotted today? I mean, you talked about flooding the zone, which apparently is an American sporting term.
Yes, although feels rather literal as of yesterday. Yes, I mean, it's been an absolutely extraordinary sort of first 10 days or so in office for Donald Trump, who has kind of gone wild with executive orders and appears to be kind of completely reforming, changing the entire kind of US federal system, with his what do we even call him? Because we don't know what job Elon Musk has. His aide, his acolyte, he doesn't appear to have an official role.
Wingman.
I mean, yes, maybe one of these sorts of words, but he doesn't appear to have an official role. West Wingman. I like that. That's good. But I mean, Musk appears to be going in. There's a pretty extraordinary story about it in the Washington Post, about sort of Musk going in and kind of causing chaos, really. He seems to have got himself access to, the US Treasury, to all sorts of kind of documents. And he seems to be also taking, quite a big role in whether various officials stay in their jobs or not. So the story in the Washington Post is senior US official exits after rift with Musk allies over payment system. So basically, it seems that Musk's people have kind of gone in to the Treasury and, got themselves into these, really quite sensitive computer systems with lots of people's details on them. Now, these people, as I say, are not working for the government. Therefore, all of their communications and so on are not being officially monitored. This is just sort of what's happening. And people are saying it's a bit like the Twitter playbook from Musk. He's just going in, it's the move fast, break things. But I mean, it is breaking things. And of course, a lot of questions now being asked about the FAA in particular. We've had, horrifyingly, in the last couple of days, 2 quite significant plane crashes in the US. Now, on the 20th of January, Musk called on the head of the FAA to resign, and he did. Somebody who he's had a lot of run-ins with over regulation of his businesses. And we've seen, federal employees generally being exhorted to resign, and suddenly these 2 crashes. Now, obviously, I'm not an investigator. I don't know if those things are linked or not. And we will have to wait to see the outcome of those investigations to know what's going on. But it doesn't look good. And I certainly would have thought that if the Democrats had more of a political spine, they would be asking questions about this.
What do the Democrats do about all this? Because last time it was all like, Trump came in and he tried to do the same thing, that sort of, scorched earth approach to government. And it didn't quite work because it took everybody by surprise, but he wasn't quite as absolutely raring and ready to go as he is this time around. But last time the Democrats were a bit like, we'll just wait, we'll see, we'll just do this, we'll take it on a piecemeal and, kind of let's try and apply reason to this. Clearly, that is not an approach which has worked. But if you're sitting in Democrat HQ and you're seeing the flood the zone stuff happening in front of you, what do? Do you pick your fights? Because you can't fight everything all the time. And also I'm thinking of newsrooms as well, that do we now no longer have regional reporters and correspondents, but we have a correspondent who focuses on health, a correspondent who focuses on defence, because they can kind of monitor each thing that's happening. Because if you just sort of sit from the position that most of us are at the moment, it is overwhelming and we're going to miss stuff.
Yes, it's incredibly hard to keep up. And I do think it's a huge and very difficult challenge for the Democrats. I'm not at all unsympathetic on that basis. I think it is very difficult. But I think there has been a problem where they have underrated the possibility of this. Project 2025, which was, came out last year, long before the election, was a sort of playbook. And of course, Trump distanced himself from it. But 2/3 of the executive orders that he's been issuing either come directly from it or mirror very closely things in that. So they should have been taking that seriously. They should have been preparing for this. Well, they haven't. Here we are. But I think now it is difficult for them to know how to respond. But I think that, and obviously they also don't control the organs of government. I mean, effectively, these sort of executive orders, in some ways, of course, you could see government by executive order as quite weak. I mean, it looks strong, but actually, this isn't going through a kind of proper legislative process. This is just chucking stuff out. And a lot of it will run into problems in the courts, in Congress and so on. There are actually stops on this. So, he's issuing these things, but it's already happened that he kind of issued this sort of crazy memo stopping all federal grants and spending, and then sort of rescinded it, and it was said that was a bit of an accident or whatever, although unclear. But actually a court has stopped that as well. It can't be done. So there is going to be, these checks and balances will come in. Just because he issues these fiats, it doesn't mean they'll all stick.
That does give some sort of reassurance, but the ultimate effect, surely, is one of a destabilising narrative. So let's talk about, so if you think about the freezing of the grants and loans that happened, goodness me, it seems like an eternity ago, but I think it was only Wednesday or Tuesday. I think we've just lost count. The fact remains is that it's out there, it comes back, but it never really goes away.
Yes.
And if you spin that narrative the whole time, whether or not it actually happens or not, it almost doesn't matter in many ways, because we know, or we are told, that big changes are happening.
Yes, and as you say, there's so many of them so quickly that it is extremely hard to stay on top of it. I mean, I do think the Democrats have to oppose this strongly. What they need to be looking at and thinking about is that Trump is actually pretty unpopular. His approval rating is about 47%. It's very low for a president coming into office. Not so unusual once a president has been in office for a while. So there isn't a sort of the idea of, and I think a lot of them sort of retreat into their slightly, you mentioned the West Wing, thinking of the TV show The West Wing, their slightly sort of West Wing comfort zone of maybe we can be bipartisan and sensible. Well, I don't think that's really feasible, realistically, looking at how this administration is already operating. So, in fact, I think they need to be opposing it quite strongly. They also could look at the fact that Elon Musk is even more unpopular than Donald Trump. He's actually deeply unpopular with the American people, and asking questions about that. Now, really, all they can do at the moment is make a lot of noise. But I think the noise is worth making because that is the business of opposition. And yes, it is all happening at once. It's going to be hard to respond to everything. And a lot of these things will require legal challenges and so on. And it's going to be a huge job, not just from the official Democrat Party, but from all sorts of, different, for instance, advocacy groups and so on. Trump has issued a lot of executive orders specifically attacking, for instance, trans people. Now, in that case, what you'll often have is advocacy groups getting involved to challenge those in the courts as well. But I think it's got to happen on sort of every level. The problem is this challenge must be met because otherwise it's just going to steamroll straight ahead. And I mean, from what we know, we have tariffs about to start on goods from Canada, Mexico, and indeed the EU. So we're in a very scary time and things could also change very fast around that.
And Mark Carney already standing up and already saying that he's, acting like the next Prime Minister of Canada. Yes. So we still haven't actually, voted a new one in, but Mr. Carney's in there saying he'll respond dollar for dollar. In terms of the way that the world moves on, I'm just sort of fumbling through the FT weekend today, which is always a pleasure. Thank you, FT. It has an opinion written by Christine Lagarde and Ursula von der Leyen. I mean, what a brilliant combo that must have been to sit down over the... I wonder who did the typing. Literally, it's like, no, I'm going to go on the laptop. No, I'm going on the laptop. No, you go on the laptop. I wonder who's a better typer. Right. We got obviously the President of the European Central Bank and President of the European Commission talking about Europe has got the message on change. Because I think a lot of people have said that as the Trump whirlwind goes apace, everyone's looking at Europe, which is still sitting there having its second coffee and reading the paper and discussing what it might do next. And it is this feeling, isn't it, that Europe has absolutely got to sort of pull its socks up and get going.
Well, absolutely. And actually was discussing on the Monocle Daily, again, it seems like 100 years ago, but I think it was sort of last week
Yesterday.
or something. After the summit at Davos, where, of course, Trump kind of zoomed in for a video call. And there was a great feeling of depression that day, I think, among Europeans at the summit, that, that basically we were being left behind. The Americans were soaring ahead. Where was this coming from? How on earth could Europeans respond to this kind of, incredibly bullish US, bullish and bullying? And of course, a day or two after that, we might talk about later, but we heard about DeepSeek. And AI, $1 trillion was wiped off various AI stocks. And suddenly it sort of looked like, well, actually, maybe this US confidence. There's a lot can change very quickly. I think the challenge for Europe now, and it's good to see Christine Lagarde and Ursula von der Leyen talking about it, actually, is sort of, yes, to respond to, but also to hold on to, I think, European values in the face of this kind of, extraordinary authoritarian turn by the US. I do think that it's going to be quite important to hold together. And of course, that's within the EU. That's been very difficult as well. Naturally, there's a far-right resurgence here as well in lots of places. But I do think that, there's obviously questions about, yes, economically, they're saying we need to make Europe a better place to invest. Yes, I think that's probably true. Of course, you do need to think about making business work in Europe and all of that. But I think at the same time, it can't just be a race to the bottom. There has to be also, I think, a focus on, genuinely on values of freedom, democracy, liberty and so forth that actually have been so important to the European project.
There is a recognition in this article that Europe is probably not punching at its weight. It's probably punching below its weight, which is an astonishing admission by arguably two of the most powerful women you have in charge of the European Union. It says our competitiveness is at risk. While a global revolution in artificial intelligence unfolds, the EU could find itself on the sidelines. Our traditional manufacturing champions are losing global market share. Geopolitical shifts are turning dependencies into vulnerabilities. I mean, you could almost open brackets and go artificial intelligence, open brackets, China. Traditional manufacturing, open brackets, China.
Yes.
And then you go geopolitical shifts are turning dependencies into vulnerabilities. Guess what?
Yep.
China.
Exactly. And I mean, the thing is, you can't stop it. It's going to be interesting what happens, with so many plates spinning at the moment with all of this. And I do think one trend that we're probably going to see is a kind of more of a sort of economies actually retreating a bit and becoming more nationalistic in a sense. And I'm not, because especially in response to, if there's going to be sort of trade wars and tariffs and so forth, I think countries have to think about, one response to it, should we say, is that countries might think about becoming rather more self-sufficient in some of these ways. We've got very used to a kind of global international trade system. But if you are dealing with these extraordinary difficulties, is there some pressure actually to buy local?
Thank you for that, Alex. It's just turning 9:26 here in London. You're listening to Monocle on Saturday. The person usually in this seat is Georgina Godwin. She's off on the most spectacular tour. If you want to hear a little bit about what she's up to, then here she is. She's off on her assignment and she's left us with something special. Here's her latest instalment from her travels.
This week I've moved on from the frenetic pace of Calcutta to the pink city of Jaipur in Rajasthan for the 18th edition of the Literature Festival, billed as the world's grandest celebration of books and ideas. This is not mere rhetoric. The past 17 years have seen it transform into a global literary phenomenon, having hosted nearly 2,000 speakers and welcoming over 1 million book lovers from across India and the globe. The 2025 edition boasts 11 Pulitzer winners, 7 Nobel laureates, 5 Booker Prize winners or nominees, and a host of other award-winning writers and thinkers, 300 in total. It's hugely international in its breadth, hosting talks in 26 languages, 13 international and 13 Indian, a polyphonic orchestra, as festival co-director Namita Gokhale calls it, with opening speeches given by the EU ambassador to India and a reception hosted by the Norwegian embassy, with many other countries officially represented too. The opening party took place at the Rambar Palace, a top-notch property owned by the Taj Group. We were driven in golf carts through flaming torches, past prancing stallions, serenaded by traditional musicians, and immersed in a sea of twinkling lights. Alighting, we walked through a softly lamp-lit winding path to a vast banquet, a culinary feast from all over the country, delicious morsels from every region of India. The talks themselves are held in the grounds of the 5-star Clark's Amer Hotel, an explosion of colour with vibrant bunting, flags, tassels and banners fluttering from every tree and structure. European book festivals should take note. The Speaker's Green Room has at least 5 chefs on hand. This oasis is needed as the grounds are thronged with book lovers wanting autographs, photographs and conversation, and the talks themselves are wildly stimulating, making a tamarind shot or a Bombay sapphire and tonic in the shade especially welcoming. I'll be debating the future of war, as well as hosting various panels across the week with many visiting and local authors. And in between, I'll be going to more fabulous parties and going shopping. The jewellery and fabrics on offer are outstanding. If you'd like to know more about the festival and Namita Gokhale, the woman responsible for much of it, do head over to our Meet the Writers archive, where you can hear an interview I did with her earlier. And I'll be adding new interviews with people I meet on my travels weekly, so do keep an ear out.
Thank you so much for that, Georgina. I know that reference to jewels and fabrics was actually a veiled message to you.
It was a hint to me because I've promised to send Georgina some shopping tips for Jaipur, which is, it must be said, one of the world's great places to shop.
Thank you so much for that, Georgina, if you're listening. I hope you're having a wonderful time, and don't worry, the email's on the way. That's all the time we have for today's programme. The warmest of thanks to Alex von Tunzelmann, my guest. Thank you, Alex. And thanks also to producer Desiree Bandley. Our studio engineer was Flynn Simons. Monocle on Saturday's back next weekend. But for now, from me, Emma Nelson, goodbye. Thanks for listening. Enjoy your Saturday.